Ladies and gentlemen, when someone says, "You're just being too insecure," they're not addressing the concern you've raised, they're redirecting it. This phrase is a classic example of blame shifting, a tactic often used to avoid accountability. Instead of taking responsibility for actions that may have hurt you or explaining behavior that raised suspicion, they turn the spotlight onto you. Suddenly, the focus isn't on what they did or didn't do, it's on how you're supposedly overreacting. This is not just unfair, it's emotionally manipulative. Blame shifting works because it targets your vulnerability. Most people in relationships want to be seen as trusting, stable, and supportive. No one wants to be labeled as insecure. So when your partner accuses you of being too sensitive or doubtful, it can hit a nerve. You start questioning yourself. Am I reading too much into this? Maybe I am being paranoid. And just like that, your valid concern is buried under self-doubt. This shift can slowly chip away at your confidence, making you second guess your instincts and perceptions. It's not just about that one argument or moment. It's about how those moments accumulate and change how you see yourself. What makes this even more troubling is the context in which these words are often said. In relationships where infidelity is a factor, people who are cheating can become defensive and evasive when questioned. Rather than being honest or giving reassurance, they go on the offense. It's a distraction technique. By making you feel like the problem, they avoid discussing their own suspicious actions. And over time, you might find yourself apologizing for feeling upset, even when your instincts were spot on. You're not just being silenced, you're being conditioned to silence yourself. This phrase also reveals a lack of emotional responsibility. A caring partner doesn't diminish your feelings, they acknowledge them. Even if they believe you're mistaken, they'll engage with you to understand why you're feeling this way. But when someone says you're too insecure, they dismiss your emotions entirely. There's no attempt to empathize, no effort to resolve the issue, just a cold judgment of your character. That's not how someone who loves and respects you behaves. That's how someone deflects guilt while keeping their secrets safe. It's important to recognize this behavior for what it is, a power move. By making you feel small or irrational, they gain control of the narrative. They get to decide what's valid and what's not. And in that imbalance, it becomes easier for them to continue deceiving you while you question your own reality. Relationships are supposed to be a safe space where concerns are met with compassion, not condemnation. When you're made to feel guilty just for noticing that something feels off, that's not love, that's manipulation. Recognizing the power behind those 6 words is the first step in reclaiming your voice, your clarity, and your self-worth. When someone responds to your concerns in a relationship with the words, "You're just being too insecure," what they're often doing is avoiding accountability. Instead of addressing your feelings or the situation that made you feel uneasy, they take a shortcut, a deflection that immediately puts an end to the conversation. This response doesn't resolve anything, it simply sidesteps responsibility. In healthy relationships, when a concern arises, both people should be able to have an open and respectful dialogue. But when someone chooses to shut it down with blame disguised as advice, it speaks volumes about their unwillingness to be held accountable for their actions. Avoiding accountability can take many forms, but one of the most common is dismissal. When a person cheats or crosses a boundary and they are confronted, they might feel cornered. Rather than offering honesty, they try to regain control by changing the narrative. By calling you insecure, they're not just avoiding the topic, they're redefining it. Your concern is no longer about their behavior, but about your supposed emotional instability. It's a move that shifts attention away from them and onto you. This tactic is not only manipulative, it's an evasion. It shows that rather than taking a moment to reflect on how their actions affect the relationship, they would rather protect their image at your emotional expense. Another aspect of avoiding accountability is the refusal to engage in meaningful conversation. When someone uses dismissive language, they are essentially putting up a wall. That wall isn't just keeping out your questions, it's keeping out vulnerability and honesty. It sends a clear message: I'm not going to answer for anything, I'm not going to explain myself, I'll just label you as irrational and move on. In doing so, they block any opportunity for mutual understanding or growth. Their priority becomes self-preservation, not the health of the relationship. It's especially concerning because people who avoid accountability often do so habitually. Today, they might dismiss a question about a late-night text. Tomorrow, it could be about disappearing for hours without explanation. Each time they dodge responsibility, they train you to expect less truth, less transparency. You begin to suppress your concerns to avoid being labeled as overbearing or emotional. The relationship starts to lose its foundation of trust, not because of a single betrayal, but because accountability is repeatedly absent. Being accountable doesn't mean always being perfect. It means being willing to talk about imperfections, to listen when your partner is hurt, and to take ownership when your actions cause harm. When someone consistently refuses to do that, when they silence you with accusations of insecurity instead of confronting the issue, they show that they're not interested in being a true partner. They're interested in maintaining comfort and control, even if that means leaving you confused, unheard, and emotionally isolated. And that's not a relationship. It's a one-sided game where only one person wins. Recognizing the avoidance for what it is can be a powerful step toward protecting your emotional well-being and demanding the respect and accountability you truly deserve. When someone says, "You're just being too insecure," it often does more than just dismiss your concern. It actively exploits your emotions. It takes the natural human need for reassurance and turns it into a weapon against you. In a moment when you're likely already feeling vulnerable, confused, or even betrayed, that phrase delivers an emotional blow. Instead of offering clarity or comfort, the person makes you feel like your emotions are invalid, exaggerated, or even the root of the problem. It's a subtle but deeply damaging form of manipulation that undermines your ability to trust your own feelings. The exploitation lies in the way this phrase targets your emotional sensitivity. In relationships, it's normal to experience moments of doubt or fear, especially when behaviors shift or red flags begin to appear. Rather than engaging in a compassionate and honest dialogue, the person flips the narrative to make you feel embarrassed or ashamed for caring too much. They know you're seeking reassurance, they know you're hurting, but instead of easing your worry, they use that moment of weakness to take control. They exploit your emotional openness as if it's a flaw, rather than a sign that you care deeply about the relationship. What makes this especially harmful is that it leads you to question your instincts. You might have noticed something genuinely troubling, sudden changes in behavior, hidden messages, late-night disappearances. But when your emotional response is used against you, you start to doubt whether you're even allowed to feel uneasy. This emotional confusion can be paralyzing. You wonder if you're too sensitive, if you're needy, or if you're the one damaging the relationship just by expressing your feelings. And that's exactly what the person wants, to redirect your attention away from their actions and onto your emotional reactions. This tactic can gradually wear down your self-esteem. Over time, if your emotions are constantly dismissed or mocked, you begin to internalize that reaction. You may start to suppress your feelings altogether, fearing judgment or rejection. You stop asking questions. You stop expressing concerns. You silence your voice to avoid being called dramatic or clingy. And in doing so, you give more and more power to the person who is using your emotions against you. It creates an emotional imbalance where one person feels safe and unchallenged, while the other feels insecure, silenced, and emotionally isolated. There's also a deep irony in this manipulation. The same emotions that are being used against you, your care, your concern, your emotional investment, are what make you a strong and loving partner, but those qualities become vulnerabilities when someone exploits them instead of cherishing them. Emotional depth should be met with empathy, not used as ammunition. When someone uses your feelings to deflect accountability or avoid difficult conversations, they're not just being dismissive, they're being emotionally exploitative. That level of manipulation can have lasting effects, not just on the relationship, but on how you view your own emotional worth. Recognizing this pattern is essential, because no one deserves to have their genuine feelings twisted into evidence of weakness. When someone repeatedly says, "You're just being too insecure," it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It often signals a larger, more troubling pattern in the relationship. While hearing it once might be brushed off as a poor reaction in the heat of the moment, hearing it again and again becomes a red flag that shouldn't be ignored. Patterns in language often reflect deeper patterns in behavior. In this case, the repetition of dismissive language indicates a repeated refusal to engage with emotional responsibility, a consistent evasion of accountability, and possibly a broader strategy to manipulate and control the narrative in the relationship. Patterns don't just show up in what's said, but when and why it's said. If every time you raise a concern, whether it's about their late night behavior, lack of communication, or questionable interactions with others, you're met with a quick accusation that you're too insecure, that's no longer a coincidence. That's a predictable strategic response. It becomes a default defense mechanism, one designed to silence your voice and avoid having to answer tough questions. When a person relies on the same phrase over and over in emotionally charged situations, it reveals more about their unwillingness to be honest than about any actual fault in your behavior. This pattern often emerges alongside other warning signs. You might notice defensiveness every time you ask for transparency. You may see them twisting conversations to make you feel guilty for simply expressing discomfort. Over time, these repetitive behaviors don't just make you doubt them, they make you doubt yourself. And that's exactly what this pattern is meant to do: erode your trust in your own judgment while keeping their secrets protected. A person who is cheating or hiding something learns quickly what responses shut you down. And once they know what works, they use it again and again. It's important to recognize that this is not just about isolated moments of conflict. It's about consistency. Emotional patterns, like this one, gradually condition your responses. Each time they tell you you're being insecure, it becomes harder for you to speak up the next time. You start internalizing the blame. You start believing that maybe your fears are always unfounded, even when the signs point otherwise. And that's exactly how manipulation thrives, through repetition and normalization. The more often this phrase is used, the more effective it becomes at maintaining control and deflecting suspicion. What's most dangerous about these patterns is how easily they can go unnoticed until they're deeply rooted. Because they start subtly and build slowly, they don't feel like manipulation at first. But eventually, you may realize that nearly every serious conversation ends the same way, with you feeling like the problem even when your concerns are valid. That repetition is not accidental. It's deliberate, and it often serves to cover up a reality that the other person doesn't want to face, or wants to keep you from discovering. Recognizing that this phrase is part of a larger, recurring pattern is not just a moment of awareness. It's a signal that something deeper needs to be addressed, both in the behavior of your partner and in how you protect your emotional well-being. When someone tells you you're just being too insecure, it does more than simply dismiss your feelings. It actively shuts down the possibility for honest, open communication. Relationships are built on the foundation of dialogue, understanding, and mutual respect. When communication is suppressed, that foundation begins to crack, often in subtle ways that are difficult to recognize at first. Over time, what seems like just a defensive comment becomes a recurring barrier that prevents meaningful conversation, emotional intimacy, and trust from flourishing. This phrase is often used in moments when you are trying to express discomfort, confusion, or even hurt. Instead of being met with compassion or curiosity, you're met with a wall. That wall tells you that not only are your feelings unimportant, but that raising them is a problem in itself. The suppression starts small. You bring up something that doesn't feel right. Maybe a sudden change in behavior, a lie you caught, or just a growing distance. Instead of engaging with your concern, the other person invalidates it. They call it insecurity, They act as though even mentioning it is irrational or emotionally unstable. As a result, you walk away not only without answers, but with the heavy feeling that your voice doesn't matter. After enough of these experiences, you begin to hesitate before speaking up. You begin to weigh the cost of bringing up anything sensitive because you already know how the other person will respond. You become quieter, more cautious, and more withdrawn. That change doesn't happen because you've suddenly stopped caring. It happens because the relationship has conditioned you to believe that communicating openly is dangerous or pointless. This form of emotional shutdown is incredibly damaging because it distorts what healthy communication should look like. In a supportive relationship, disagreements and concerns are not only expected, they're respected. Both people should feel safe enough to express how they feel without fear of judgment, dismissal, or retaliation. When you're made to feel like your concerns are embarrassing or excessive, it creates an emotional environment where only one person's comfort matters. The person who shuts down communication maintains control, while the other person is left in a constant state of emotional hesitation. Eventually, this suppression leads to emotional distance. Intimacy fades not because love disappears overnight, but because the basic tools needed to keep love alive, talking, listening, understanding, are no longer accessible. You might still be physically close, but emotionally you feel alone. You stop asking questions. You stop seeking reassurance. You might even stop expecting honesty. And that's one of the most tragic outcomes of suppressed communication. It lowers your standards for what you accept in a relationship. You begin to think that silence is safer than honesty, that peace means avoiding conflict at any cost. The phrase "you're just being too insecure" might seem minor in isolation, but when it becomes a regular response to your efforts to communicate, it signals something far more serious. It signals that one partner is no longer willing, or never was, to create a space where dialogue can thrive. And without that space, love cannot grow in a healthy or sustainable way. When someone tells you you're just being too insecure, in response to a legitimate concern, there's often more beneath the surface than just defensiveness. It can be a subtle hint at guilt. While not every dismissive comment automatically proves wrongdoing, this particular phrase is commonly used by people who are trying to cover something up. It's a way to deflect attention from their own behavior and redirect scrutiny onto you. Rather than providing reassurance, transparency, or honesty, they shift the conversation so that their actions are no longer the focus. This shift, done consistently and deliberately, is often a sign that there is something they are trying to hide. People who feel guilty frequently attempt to downplay the situation to relieve their own discomfort. Instead of sitting in the tension of being questioned, they take a shortcut by minimizing the concern altogether. By saying you're insecure, they imply that the problem lies entirely with your emotional state, not with their behavior. But what's really happening is an attempt to escape the discomfort of accountability. Guilt often produces anxiety, and that anxiety can show up in ways meant to shut down a conversation quickly. If they can get you to stop asking questions, they don't have to deal with the possibility of getting caught. It becomes a defense mechanism, not just to avoid conflict, but to avoid exposure. This behavior becomes even more revealing when it appears alongside other signs. If they're overly protective of their phone, become defensive when asked about their whereabouts, or offer vague answers to direct questions, then using the "you're too insecure" line can be part of a broader strategy to cover tracks. Guilty people often become uncomfortable when their partner starts connecting the dots. Rather than offer clear explanations, they rush to invalidate your perspective, and by doing so, they try to throw you off course. It's not just about ending the conversation. It's about making you doubt your own intuition. What makes this especially harmful is that it turns the emotional consequences of their actions back onto you. You're hurt, confused, or suspicious because of something they did, or something they're hiding, but instead of addressing that, they blame your reaction. That kind of emotional reversal is a powerful way to silence someone without ever having to tell the truth. Guilt doesn't always show up as an apology or nervousness. Sometimes it shows up as blame, sarcasm, or cold detachment. And when someone goes out of their way to make you feel like the irrational one for asking a question, that reaction may be less about you being wrong and more about them being afraid you're right. Trust your instincts. People who have nothing to hide tend to be patient, open, and willing to have uncomfortable conversations. They don't panic or lash out when questioned. They listen, explain, and care how you feel. When someone quickly pulls out the insecurity card to end a discussion, it often reveals more than they intend. That instinct to shut you down may be the clearest sign yet that something isn't as innocent as they claim.